Cosima struggled to keep her eyes open as the bus trundled along the seemingly never-ending road. Her head rested against the cool glass, and although her neck was bent at a strange angle, it was relaxing in a way. She had had no idea why she'd thought flying from Singapore to Reykjavik was a good idea, but 72 hours ago it had seemed completely logical. Cosima had loved travelling around Asia, but she felt like a bit of a stereotype. Straight out of school, she had turned 18 with no idea what she wanted to do with her life, and hopped on the first plane going anywhere from here. She'd ended up in Thailand, and she hadn't looked back. She'd traversed the continent for nearly a year now, and she was starting to miss home. Well, her home continent, that was. She didn't think she'd be welcomed back home. She'd left home with a backpack and £70 in her pocket, her mother's cutting remarks still rebounding in her ears. Those little words had left little cuts on her soul that refused to heal, and she tried to bandage them up time and time again, but she'd never quite managed it. On those long nights on the overnight bus or the airport floor, her mother's voice had reverbed back in her mind over and over again. You're lazy, you're reckless, you're arrogant and cold, and you don't care about your family. They didn't understand her. They never had. But it didn't matter, not really. What could the UK hold for her when there was an entire world to explore? But she didn't want to think about this now. Cosima forced her eyes to open as wide as she could, staring at the beautiful, Martianesque landscape, trying to take in as much as she could. All her life she had been running, trying to find something to fill this anxious hole inside of her soul. Maybe she'd find it in Iceland. As her gaze meandered over the sloping peaks and valleys, her heart lifted as she saw the city lights. It was a new adventure. It would be exactly what she needed. Sighed happily as she walked up to the door of her hostel. She'd gotten off at the wrong bus stop and had spent a long afternoon wandering around Reykjavik. She hadn't minded, really. The town was adorable, she thought, like something off of a postcard. She loved colourful buildings, the street art, how safe she felt. She'd been caught up in the beauty of the town, running up the rainbow road to gaze at Hallgrímskirkja, pulling kissy faces at the cats through the windows of the cat cafe, watching lights rebound off the glass facade of the Harper concert hall. There was simplicity and calm to the beauty of Reykjavik, a welcome change after the brightness and busyness of Singapore, and before that the non-stop tours through Asia. She knew she wouldn't be able to stay here very long, though. What might start as a welcome, relaxing break was likely to turn boring, and Cosima's itchy feet would influence her into catching yet another plane. But not yet, though. She trundled up the stairs of the hostel to the reception, desperate for a bed. It'd been nearly 2 days since she'd actually slept lying down, and she needed to stretch out. Collecting her keys, she sighed and started up the next lot of stairs. I wish there was a lift, she muttered to herself, her backpack feeling heavier and heavier with each step. All at once, it felt too much for her, and she lowered her backpack, trying to take a deep breath to steady herself. She rubbed her eyes, wondering how she was going to get up all the steps, and jumped when she felt a light hand land on her back. "Excuse me, miss." A deep, booming voice appeared from behind her. She turned, and her eyes landed on him. The guy from the reception desk. She had thought he was fit when she was checking in, but immediately had discounted it. She was here to see the island, not just get under some fit Icelandic guy. He was tall, easily over 6 foot to her 5'5", had long blonde hair and a beard and the kindest eyes she'd ever seen. But seeing him again, she felt a little flutter in the pit of her stomach. This wasn't what she had planned on, but hey, what was the harm in a little flin? "Hi," she replied, smiling, her voice coming up higher than she meant. His smile was so warm and so calming she felt immediately at ease. "Would you like help with your bags?" he asked, his voice rumbling. "Yeah, please, if you wouldn't mind," she replied, wondering how this man was able to pick the backpack up so easily when she knew how weighty it was. He sped past her up the staircase as she pulled herself up it slowly, and by the time she'd made it to the landing, he already had the door open for her. "We upgraded you to private as we had the space. No extra charge," he explained as she walked in, immediately excited for the plump double bed. "Thank you so much. For the upgrade and for the help, she answered, her smile feeling wide and goofy. His smile reflected hers, and she suddenly realised that she didn't know his name. "I'm Cosima," she blurted out, sticking her hand out for a handshake, internally wincing. But he stepped forward, took her hand and gently raised it to his mouth to gently kiss it. "I am Einar. You have a very beautiful name." He smiled. She could feel herself blushing. "My mother had very high aspirations for me." She trailed off, suddenly feeling embarrassed of herself and her life and the disappointment she had turned out to become. "You will do great things yet, Cosima," Einar asserted, before nodding at her and leaving the room. Cosima took a moment to take in just what happened before falling into the bed. Knock, knock on the door woke Cosima. She sat upright in a daze, suddenly ravenous. She'd fallen asleep immediately in her clothes, having not eaten anything since the snack she'd been given on the plane hours earlier. She had been sleeping deeply, hair full of tangles, dribbled down the side of her face and the pillow, clothes dishevelled. She must have really needed that nap. What woke her up again? Knock! Knock! Bewildered, she slipped out of the bed and plodded over to the door, opening it quickly, smiling as she recognised Einar. "Hey, what are you doing up at midnight?" she asked, aware that she probably looked like a state. "I'm doing the night shift. Quick, come with me." He grabbed her hand as he explained, pulling her out of the room, and before she realised it, they were running up the stairs, before he abruptly stopped. He grabbed a coat from a coat rack Cosima hadn't even seen, and bundled her up in her new coat before she even knew what was happening. "What's going on?" She laughed as he quickly donned his own coat, and took her hand again, winking as he pulled her outside. They walked out into a rooftop bar Cosima hadn't even noticed, and she looked around excitedly, aware that he still hadn't let go of her hand. "This is really nice," she exclaimed, as she heard him sniggering. "You're not looking in the right direction," he mock-scolded, and he pointed in the distance. Turning around, Cosima saw it. She gasped. The northern lights were dancing over the city of Reykjavik, streaks of green and grey floating and dancing over the city. Cosima felt her jaw drop as she watched the lights seem to play and twist around in the sky. And then, suddenly, a dash of pink intertwined with the grey and the green, and the stars seemed to shine brighter, and this seemed like the most magical place Cosima had ever been. "The lights are so strong tonight," she gasped. "There is a solar storm," Einar stated. Overwhelmed with emotion, Cosima rested her head against his shoulder, squeezed his hand. "Thanks for showing me," she whispered, watching a smile spread across his face. Her heart suddenly felt warm, and she knew she was going to be here in Iceland for a while yet. 6 months later. She had been right. She knew she would be. Half a year had passed, and the novelty and allure of Iceland was starting to grow tired for Cosima. Sure, the island was beautiful. It was like nowhere Cosima had ever been before, or possibly would ever be again. She'd insisted on going on all the tours and seeing as much as she possibly could, dragging Einar alongside her when she could get him away from the hostel desk. She'd seen black sand beaches and glaciers and geysers and volcanoes, and then they'd rented a car to drive the Golden Circle, and after that she'd gone whale watching and dolphin hunting. She'd exhausted herself seeing Iceland to the max. She knew that deep down, and her feet were starting to itch. She was done with Iceland now. It was time to move on. But she couldn't. He was here. The more time she spent here, the more she was grateful to have found Einar. He let her drag him around Iceland, always making sure he had snacks for them on his travels. He'd gotten her a job at the hostel so she could earn a bit of money, and within a week she was staying with him. She'd sit at the table with a glass of wine while he'd cook her dinner, and she'd sit there, thinking about how comfortable she felt in their domesticity, and wish it was enough for her. She knew deep down that it wasn't. She wandered around the small apartment that she so wished was also hers completely, looking at how well her stuff had slotted in with his. Her clothes hung up against his, her blue toothbrush standing in the pot by the sink with his red one, her writing on the kitchen chalkboard with their hostel shifts written next to each other. This was the perfect life, just not for her. The closing of the front door pulled her out of her reverie, and she heard Einar discard his coat. "Hi, Minkera," he called, and Cosima felt her heart lift. If she wasn't so guarded, she would think she was falling in love with him. "I brought dinner." Intrigued, she walked into the living room/kitchen, watching as he happily unboxed yet another takeaway meal. It smelt delicious, and she quickly realised he had brought home their favourite. "Curry from the little place on the corner? Again?" she teased, poking her tongue out at him. He rolled his eyes at her playfully. "It is the best takeaway in town," he played along as he rummaged in the drawer for cutlery. She sat down, surveying the food. "You got the tali again, then?" she asked, as he walked over, kissing her lightly on the top of her head before sitting down as well. "Yes, we can share. I got the samosas as well. They're your favourite," he remarked as he pulled the food in front of him and started eating. "My favourite. You're going to look like a samosa, the amount of them you eat," she joked, and he laughed so hard he nearly choked. They lay there in bed that evening, like they always did, limbs entwined with the others. It's where Cosima felt most safe, and if she had to hazard a guess, she would say that was the same for Einar as well. He nuzzled into her neck, his long blonde hair combining with her curly brown hair, his arm tight over her abdomen as if he didn't want to let her go. But something was circling around and around in Cosima's head, and she was scared that if she didn't let it out, it would blurt out by itself. She just needed to think how to word it. "Einar?" she started, suddenly incredibly anxious. "Yes, Minkera?" he replied. He sounded half asleep, and Cosima found herself running her hands through his hair. Lovingly, she decided. "Do you want to leave Iceland with me?" she blurted out, mentally kicking herself. That was not how she wanted to phrase that at all. Einar stirred slightly, but didn't recoil, which she thought was good. "No, Minkera, I don't, but not because of you," he stated, still sounding sleepy. For a second, Cosima was confused. "Why?" she asked, incredulously. He chuckled. "Because I love you, Cosima." There was love in his voice, but in her confusion, Cosima didn't hear it. No, why don't you want to leave?" she asked again, pulling away from him slightly. He groaned, obviously tired. "Darling, it's late and I'm tired," he started, but Cosima cut him off. "Why would you want to stay here forever? In one place? Wouldn't you get bored?" she asked. She watched as Einar groaned and let him pull her closer to him again. "Cosima, this is my home. Why would I want to leave?" he asked her. She scoffed. "Exactly. It's your home. Why would you want to stay?" she rebutted. "I love it here. It's not just my home in the geographic sense, but it's my home in terms of my soul. I was created to be here. I find myself in the crashing of the sea against the rocks, in the flow of the lava down the hill, in the geysers that shoot for the skies. I wasn't meant to wander, Cosima. I am not meant for the world. I was meant for Iceland," he concluded, watching her. She could feel her face fall. "And I was meant to roam and to explore. I can't stay in one place for too long. It's like my feet are itchy and I become too big for the place, and it feels like if I don't move on, I will die," Cosima stated. He chuckled, and her heart sank. He didn't understand her and her nature. It wasn't a surprise to her, but it hurt nonetheless. "You're so dramatic, Minkera," he mumbled. "It's because I'm a Sagittarius," she answered, sadly, emotionlessly. He laughed, but she knew he wasn't listening. He was halfway back to sleep. "You'll feel different soon now we're settling down," he continued, and Cosima shook her head. "No, I will never feel different. I will never be able to settle down. completely, not at least. It's not that I like to travel, Einar. I have to. It's more of me than I would ever be able to explain. She looked down at him. His eyes were closed. If you could go anywhere in the universe, anywhere that would satisfy you and that would make you want to settle down, where would it be? He asked her. Cosima closed her eyes, taking a minute to visualise the place, and chose her words carefully. I don't think Earth could contain me. I think if I could go anywhere, I would want to travel amongst the stars. She felt lightheaded and excited just thinking about it. But when she looked at Einar, she realised that he hadn't heard her. He was completely and utterly asleep. She looked down at him, her heart throbbing with love and heartbreaking confusion. She knew what she wanted to do, but did she have it in her? Cosima sat by herself in the rooftop bar, staring out at the city lights of Reykjavik. She knew what she had to do now. If she was being honest with herself, she had known it for a while. She just wasn't ready to admit that to herself. This wasn't fair. She wished so much that she was the type of person who could just settle down somewhere and meet someone and stay with them and be happy. But that wasn't Cosima. That had never been Cosima, even as much as she wanted to. But she needed to go. She needed a new adventure. She couldn't stay in Iceland anymore. She heard the door behind her open, and her heart sank. She didn't want to do this. She was hoping he would change his mind. "Hey," she breathed as he sat down, and he half smiled, half winced back. She could see the pain in his eyes. She knew that he was hurting. He was almost everything she'd ever wanted in a partner, and now she was leaving him behind. It was stupid of her. But she knew she would always run away. His hand snaked across the table and took hers, quickly raising her hand to his lips to kiss it gently. The last kiss they would ever share. "Please stay," he whispered, but they both knew it was for naught. "I want to," she started, but Einar cut her off. He dropped her hand as he abruptly stood up, walking towards the edge of the deck. "If you want to stay, Cosima, you can just stay. Make a choice to stay, Cosima, please. Please choose to commit, for once," he shouted, tears streaming from his eyes. "I know what I'm meant to do now, Einar. I know what I'm meant for, what I've been building towards all my life," she pleaded as she watched him crumple before his eyes. "Can't I be enough?" he asked, and her heart broke somewhat. Her answer was spoken before she could even formulate what she wanted to say, before the words could even come to her mind. "No," she heard herself say. It was so cold, so callous of her. It hurt her even to hear it, but as she watched Einar's heart shatter into 1,000 tiny, irreparable pieces, she knew she'd hurt him even more. There was no coming back from this. She had unwittingly but thoroughly destroyed him. She'd never forgive herself. "I'll be seeing you, Einar," she choked out as she turned and walked away, her eyes full of tears and a lump in her throat so large she thought it might choke her. "Be safe," was the last thing she heard before walking back into the building. She couldn't look back. It might kill her. Feeling the need to put the most distance she could between her and Iceland, she ran down the stairs, grabbing her trusty old backpack, and ran out of the hostel door, hoping she'd see Einar and Iceland once again. It was time to move on. 5 years later. Cosima struggled to open her eyes, fighting against the induced sleep she'd been put into. She didn't want to get up. She never wanted to get up. She'd been having the best dream. But there is something going on. Something important. "Don't you remember? This is it. This is everything we've ever dreamed of," a tiny voice in the back of her head prompted, and her eyes flew open. It was the maiden voyage, and she'd just been awoken by the ship. This was it, everything she'd ever dreamed of, before she even knew there were things like this to dream of. All she wanted to do was to race to the closest window and to peer at the outside, but she was older now, and wiser, and more restrained in her excitement. It had been a long road to get here, but she knew that this would be worth it. This would be the biggest adventure of all. She had traversed the world. She had seen it all, walked every trail, but it still wasn't enough. So she went home and she told her parents of her plans. It hadn't gone well, as she expected. They'd said she'd never be able to do it. She wasn't clever enough or focused enough. She'll never be able to complete the training. She was too flighty and impatient. But when Cosima knew she had to do something, when something called her like this did, she'd follow it to the end. She was destined for more than that world. She had called. They hadn't been happy for her to leave them behind, but they should have known she couldn't stay for long. And so she boarded a plane to Rome and the European Space Agency, and she started yet another new life, another fresh start. Carefully, she extracted herself from her sleep pod and crawled over to the ship wall. Her muscles were weak from the flight, and her eyes hadn't yet adjusted to the darkness, but her heart was soaring. And she felt her way along the side of the ship until she found the window. She felt her smile widen as she gazed down on Earth, her beautiful, beloved, Bondi blue planet. And as she looked around, it felt like fireworks exploding in her eyes and her mind and her heart as constellations formed in front of her and meteors flew by, and she was so ready to just go.